Antes de comenzar, ¿cuánto han utilizado decentralized exchanges, DEXs, and aggregators? Okay, that's a very good audience. So, I'm Mounir, founder of ParaSwap. ParaSwap exists, it's been almost 2 years. It's been running on Ethereum and also other sidechains, EVM sidechains and layer 2s. What I wanted to talk to you today about DEX aggregation and what's beyond, and especially decentralizing DEX aggregation. So if you look at ParaSwap today, it looks like this, and it's been the version that we've been running almost for 2 years with quite some variations in the user interface. Well, you want to swap one asset to the other, ETH to USDT. The main value proposition is to give the user a price that is better than the market. That's why you would use an aggregator and why you would not use a decentralized exchange, for the same reason why you would use an Expedia or Kayak and not using directly an airline company. So if you see this example, for a large trade like this, a user can save around $30,000. And one thing also introduced in ParaSwap is not only aggregating decentralized exchanges, but also aggregating what we call professional market makers, and a product gets called ParaSwap Pool. Basically, those are traders or hedge funds or any kind of trading companies that are also trading on ParaSwap. They are providing their liquidity to ParaSwap users, whether those are, again, traders or dApps like Ledger, Argent, MetaMask, and others. The benefits of using this is there is no slippage. And slippage is the price variation when a trade is happening because there are other trades that are happening at the same time, so the price will slip. And these guys offer zero slippage, which means once the price is agreed on, is locked, it's not going to change for 2 minutes. It's a very high value proposition. It looks a lot like what you can see in OTC desks. So we negotiate the price. Once it's fixed, it's locked until the trade is done. So we think it's a superior model. And as you can see here, one trade is going to aggregate multiple market makers. We are still doing the same thing, except we are filtering on this market makers. To also illustrate how this works in general, so suppose the user is selling ETH to USDT, they are making a request to the ParaSwap API, and behind the scenes, ParaSwap is scanning the liquidity of hundreds, if not tens of thousands of liquidity pools, but also scanning the liquidity of market makers. They are providing a stream of prices to ParaSwap, and at the end, we end up with a matrix of prices. We run some optimization algorithms. Those are math optimization algorithms where we try to find what we call the optimum, which is maximize the return, the amount, and minimize the fees. So the user ends up receiving an amount. Once the user agrees on that amount, like they are willing to trade, they will do what we call a soft commit. It's at the end equivalent to clicking on swap button, but behind the scenes, we are going to request what we call a firm rate from those market makers, like ask them to commit or to hard commit by sending us a signed order, and that guarantees that the price is gonna be locked for 2 minutes. Then the user received a ready to be submitted order, and it's up to them. They can just submit it to the blockchain, or they can try again. For us, the role of ParaSwap ends when the user received this signed order. Also this year, we have launched on multiple chains, starting with Polygon, then BSC, then Avalanche, and definitely on other chains and on layer 2s. The lesson learned here was the shifts of the user profile. In the beginning, we were dealing only with DeFi degens, like guys who are crypto native or DeFi natives who are using ParaSwap for very particular reasons, like doing whatever trading or farming or liquidity mining, and they need a good exchange. But now we're seeing a lot of retail. Well, part of the reason is that a lot of tokens have liquidity only or mostly in decentralized exchanges. Another reason is that sidechains, like Polygon especially, has virtually zero fees, zero gas fees. So that was something that we learned that we didn't expect, and that's how it turns out. But for me, those are not layer 2s, as many, as we may call them in the ecosystem. Those are sidechains. And ParaSwap is also building on layer 2s, and the main difference is that layer 2s inherit their security from Ethereum. Like hacking a ZK Sync is equivalent to hacking Ethereum. And hacking, I mean like stealing funds from a smart contract or from a wallet. That's really the main difference. There are many, I would say, design differences between both, but that's what we call a layer 2 and not a sidechain like Polygon. Also to illustrate that using DEX aggregators is not only about swapping from A to B, there are other use cases that can be done with DEX aggregators. For instance, we launched that project with Aave. If you go to the swap UI on Aave, you will see this. Here we're basically not swapping USDC to DAI. We are swapping a 2.18% APY into a 2.44% APY. Sometimes it can be even more. Sometimes you can see some asset with a 1% APY, another one to 8% APY. And with one swap, we can go from one into the other. And behind the scenes, what's happening is that I lend some USDC to Aave, and I'm earning some APY, and I have a collateral, something that's going to cover for this. If I borrowed, sorry, something is going to cover for whatever something else I borrowed. So if I want to swap to a better APY, what we have to do is to take into consideration that we have a collateral. If we don't, maybe we'll be subject to liquidation. So what we do, we're going to take a flash loan, cover for any collateral, swap the USD, take out the USDC, swap it for DAI using ParaSwap at the end. That's where really ParaSwap is used. Then we'll deposit or lend DAI into Aave and also close the flash loan. That's also a very interesting use case. But one last thing about the application of DEX aggregators is on the institutional side. So I talked about ParaSwap pool with professional market makers. Well, those are professional market makers, like those are between counterparties, even though the settlement is happening on-chain, but the prices are still coming from these guys. Those are entities, so they can be KYC'd, AML, and so on, which is already the case. And institutions, most of them cannot tomorrow go and trade in DeFi. Some can, and they are already doing this. But I would say the majority, or maybe the biggest guys, they cannot still do it. Like go to a Uniswap and deploy liquidity and swap from DAI to USDC. But they can do it if the counterparty is known. Is the one that have deployed liquidity is a known party, is a KYC party. And we can see an example with Aave, recently Aave Arc. They have what you call a whitelisted pools, where only institutions can deploy liquidity there and can lend and borrow between a network, a small network. So here it's exactly the same product, but with what you call a different router that has a whitelisting. And these guys will be using ParaSwap, the same exact product, except they will not go to the exact router contracts. They will go into a module on that router contract with all the parties being KYC'd. And we think this is a first step to include these institutions that represent large, I would say, liquidity that can be traded on-chain. And the main motivation is that they have access to DeFi without really using DeFi directly, because these guys, those market makers, are sourcing the liquidity from DeFi, from CeFi, and that's a good entry point. And one thing interesting that we have done as well, and we're working with that with MetaMask, is they can still use Uniswap and use DeFi only with some conditions. For instance, well, if you take Uniswap, it's not a DEX, it's a network or like a set of liquidity pools. What if a liquidity pool was or the wallet that interacted with these liquidity pools are wallet that we can consider as non-risky, like 3 Arrows or Alameda or any kind of known parties or like pseudo-known parties that have interacted. So this can have a score that can qualify this pool as non-risky. So the thing is, in ParaSwap, we're scanning the liquidity pools of all those pools again, and we can assign scores. And once a institution wants to trade, well, they can say, I'm trading only with market makers and only with pools that have a score of 70. It's just a random example. And that also can allow these institutions to start trading also directly in DeFi. And I think Sometimes it's just a psychological barrier because it's just something new and it requires some time to build confidence for institutions to trade on DeFi. Sometimes there are fiduciary duties where those funds cannot tomorrow, overnight, trade on DeFi, and I think this is a good entry point. Recently, 2 weeks ago, less than 2 weeks, the 15th of November, we launched a first iteration on future full decentralization of ParaSwap. And 3 days ago, we launched a DAO and with ParaSwap pool, with this network of liquidity providers or market makers. And the idea is to try to make those market makers even more efficient. So we think that this is a superior model because of this high quality of execution. And that was the initial launch on these guys, where users can stake on market makers. And it's a form of pushing those market makers to become even more competitive and deliver better prices. They are already very competitive compared to decentralized exchanges with high quality of execution, but here we want to boost that. And users can just say, I stake on that market maker because by staking so, both parties are incentivized to cover, like to maximize the rewards, the benefits that this, not the benefits, the margin that these market makers are doing on every trade, and users are getting at the end an APY. If you see, users are incentivized to just get an APY, and market makers, they are making a profit on every trade, and here we are maximizing their profits. Why ParaSwap pool? Again, as I said, it's a superior model, and we want them to be even more competitive and deliver a high quality of service. And as we see the applications going beyond just DeFi aggregation and going also through institutions, so we think this model should be even pushed further. And we launched also a DAO with the first vote. And thing is, with aggregation, even though we are talking about institutions and we're talking about API efficiency, but I think because we are in DeFi, if something that can be decentralized, it should be decentralized. So that's why we launched the first iteration on decentralization by launching the staking pools, launching the DAO with the very first votes, like a critical votes on which next chains we should go. And you can imagine a future where we can literally, as a team, raise our hands, and this thing has to continue because it's simply a pure software. So, muchas gracias.